Hello and welcome to the Untranslatable podcast. Today we are here recording episode 91, and we are bringing you a very, very special episode from Nusla in Prague with a great friend of mine, and it will be an exciting episode. But before we introduce our very special guest for today, without further ado, my good buddy, my pal, and the man with the tasty jams, my buddy Jared. What's going on, Jared?
Hello. You know it's a special episode because I'm wearing a blazer. Not only tasty jams, but tasty threads as well, not including my background. But first, please spread a little love and follow us on Instagram, Untranslatable Podcast, Twitter, Untranslatable1, the number 1. That's where I post the episode, songs of the pod, ridiculous things I see on Twitter. You can give us topic ideas. You can give us untranslatables, which are idioms, sayings, proverbs that don't make any sense in a certain language, but once you translate them and define them, make a little bit more sense. Or you can email us, untranslatablepodcast@gmail.com. Also, we have a website, untranslatablepodcast.com. And most importantly, if you don't listen to anything else, spread a little love, 5-star reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. It's going up. I don't know if you've noticed, but the reviews are going up. Not to brag, but I just did.
Exactly. And as I mentioned, today we have a very, very special guest and a very eloquent man who I'm happy to call my friend. He is a fantastic composer and I believe a visiting composer at HAMU. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And his name is Ravi Kittappa, and we are very, very excited to have him on our podcast today.
Yay! Oh, wait, hold on. I could have been prepared for this. Ham horn. The party just got started. What is Hamud? What's Hamud?
Hamu.
Oh, Hamu. Okay.
Hamu. So there's Hamu and Famu and Damu and all these different things. But basically, the rough translation is the Arts or Academy of Performing Arts in Prague.
Okay.
And that's where I am. Chlubny is what the H stands for. I don't know what the rest stands for.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
It's an acronym?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Capital
okay.
HAMU. Yes.
So
capital H, capital A, capital M, capital U.
Okay. So a couple days ago, Chad texted me at a obscene hour, like 3
Per usual.
And he was like, "Hey, I got a guest."
Obscene for some.
It was obscene for me, that's for sure.
It's true.
My first thing was like, why are you awake right now? But I'm glad he was, because he messaged me and he said that he had a guest and that he met you somewhere, but I don't know how you guys met or how this came to be. I'm just happy you're here.
Oh, wow. Well, I think maybe, Chad, you can explain that.
Absolutely. So,
You can pull your shirt.
oh, that's true. Yeah, I got the swag
Represent.
on today. That's right. So let me lift the mic so all of you YouTubers can see it. So I met Ravi through the Fulbright here. So I'm an English teacher, and Ravi is a visiting composer, as we mentioned. And the funny thing is we were at the same orientation in Prague. Unfortunately, didn't really chat at all. I was too busy with my English teaching cohort, and Ravi was with the other students and scholars there. And so I think we really started to hang out in Humpelets, right?
Yeah, well, I feel like, no, we must have hung out in Bubinets when we were there, right?
I wasn't with you guys in Bubinets.
Great name.
No,
I think it's a great name, isn't it?
Bubinets, yes. That's how you know you're in Prague. Bubinets. No, you were there. There's the orientation thing, man.
Uh-huh. Maybe we spoke for a minute.
Was that Bubinets or which part was? Didn't
We were in Prague 5.
Yeah, that's Bubinets.
Yeah, Bubinets. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Ravi, and I'm happy to have Ravi on because he lives here in Prague and he knows the ins and outs of Prague very well. So
Yeah, so when we had that orientation, they put him in a hotel and they didn't give me shit. I walked there. I walked there because they expect me to live there.
right.
Okay.
So I had to sort out my living situation. And I walked over there where we would meet on Ronalda Regana, is the name of the street.
Ronald Reagan, for those of you who
Oh, really?
don't speak Czech.
Yes, yeah. That's where the place was. And
Okay.
No, didn't we talk at we must have? I think we first spoke at the thing at the ambassador's house.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
we did.
That's
when we
true. First kind of connected
true.
and spoke a bit more, and yeah, and you told me a little bit about your music.
That's right.
Yes,
you're right.
Yes, and then we followed up with that in Oompa-Let's. That's right.
And so I'd just like to get back to your living situation, because you've had a very interesting ride while you've been here in Prague. So for me in Chomutov, a lot of the listeners already know I was provided accommodation through my mentor. Whereas for you, you've had you've been moving around Prague in different places. Could you explain that?
Yeah. So, I guess I can't go into all the details, right, publicly, but I was moving.
We have lawyers on standby just in case.
Don't worry.
Wait, what's the viewership of this? I don't know.
It's to the point where you can say whatever you like.
What, 12 different countries? Yeah, you'll be fine.
It varies, but somewhere around there.
Well, let's just say I was traveling around a bit for the first half of my time here in Fulbright, and so it forced me to not always be in Prague. So it was quite utilitarian for me to book short-term rentals in Airbnb. So I'd kind of stay for a few weeks or a month in one Airbnb and then move to another one, maybe travel in between for a little bit. So I just kind of have been staying in some of the cooler neighborhoods, and now I'm here in fabulous Nusla.
Is that your apartment that you guys are in right now?
This is where I'm staying now, and likely staying. I got in here at the beginning of April, and I'll be staying here until I leave, probably in the beginning of August. So, but since September, I've stayed in a lot of different neighborhoods here in Prague that I would say were very hip and cool. To my New Yorker friends, I kind of equate them to like Williamsburg and Greenpoint and those kind of places. But now I'm in Nusla, and all my Czech friends, all my Prager friends are like, "Oh, now you're really living in Prague."
Can you feel like you're really living in Prague now?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's the New Yorker in me, but anywhere I go, I'm always trying to ingratiate myself into the culture, into what's going on. I'm very into food and drink, and those things that are particular about the place that I'm in. I'm very interested in, obviously, as a musician, as a composer, I'm very interested in culture and art. So I find my little inroads through various ways, usually just by talking to people. And so, yeah, if you need some suggestions of where to eat or drink in Prague or
many
elsewhere,
other places,
I can, I certainly can give you some advice.
Chad should take some notes. We're actually doing a tour guide series coming up soon, where every other week we're going to focus on a city and talk and be like the tour guides for it. And the first one is Prague, and we're doing that in a couple days. So that actually might be useful.
Don't you worry. I already have places that Ravi has recommended that is on the list.
Okay.
Well, as the capitalist New Yorker in me, I just want to let you know I'm creating my own podcast. It's going to be a tour guide of Prague, a competitive.
Watch out.
Bring it.
Yeah.
Slipping on gator piss. So you're from New York, obviously.
Well,
not
I lived in New York as long as I lived anywhere else. I grew up on the East Coast in Pennsylvania. I went to college in Baltimore, did a year in India after that, came back and moved to New York rather quickly after I got back, and then stayed there for about 12 years. And then I moved to California for grad school. So I've been in California now, from 2012 until the fall of 2018 when I moved here to Prague.
Okay, and is that where you'd be going back to?
I will be going back to Paso Robles, California.
Okay.
Wine country.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, I Chad mentioned that you were a wine connoisseur. Does that have anything to do with you living in Paso Robles?
Yes, it certainly does. I have the reason I sort of ended up there. It's a long and convoluted story, but the way I discovered Paso is through a friend of mine who has a vineyard there who makes wine, and it's phenomenal wine. Guiamar Wines is what it's called, and his wine is really phenomenal, and I would go down there and visit him quite a bit.
I need some of those friends.
Oh,
right? No kidding. Ravi can connect you, trust me.
If you come to Paso, Jared, I've got there are a lot of other great winemakers who are my friends in Paso too. These are people that I move in those circles when I'm there. Of course, it's the best way. And my friend Ishka, who is the owner of Guiamar Wines, he's kind of... They're like my family out there in California, and I help them out with anything that I can. And so, they gave me a business card. So that means I get to show up to all these industry events. I do help them a lot, and as much as I can with events they're doing. I pour wine for them from time to time. I have put some of his wine in restaurants and bars, and that's all just fun for me. But I get my industry discount, and I get to go to all the parties and flash my card and taste wine for free. So it's fun.
What's the process for getting their wine into restaurants? Are you just going? You also mentioned that you're a foodie. You like going to restaurants. So do you just go to a restaurant and just start talking up the sommelier?
Well, yeah, it's not always that simple. So, for example, like I spent some time in Kansas City, and there was a guy there who was very interested in getting my friend Ishka's wine there. And, with all these laws that we have in the United States, you can't always ship your wine everywhere. Mm-hmm. So most of the places that I've put his wine have been rather local in San Luis Obispo County, which is where Paso is. And I have basically in those cases, it was just like talking to friends of mine who own wine bars or people reaching out to me because I'm a brand ambassador.
I think Don could take some tips from Ravi for sure.
I was going to say, if you're looking for an unpaid internship, the Untranslatable Podcast is hiring.
That's right. That's right.
Wait, I'm not getting paid for this? Shit.
We're paying you
get out of here.
Chad will pay
no
you.
more wine for you.
Trying to pay Ravi in food and compliments, what we can afford here.
But we're paying you an exposure, which is good as nothing.
Oh, man. I always hated that when I was an up-and-coming musician. Not that I'm like some established musician, but there were a lot of gigs that we would be like, yeah, is there any way we can get paid? And we're paying you with exposure. And to an extent, I think that's bullshit. But
well, that actually is a good segue to tell you about something else that I've been doing.
Absolutely.
I've been running a concert series started in New York City called Permutations. Mm-hmm. And it's now in San Francisco and Los Angeles as well as New York City. In fact, there was a concert on Saturday that unfortunately I had to miss at the Domena Center for Classical Music on the west side of Manhattan. From what I've heard, it went gangbusters. It was quite great. But the impetus for me starting this concert series is, especially in the weird kind of music that I do, there are really great musicians who can't always find the funding to do what it is, they need to do. They're not the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They're not going to, throw a party. It's serious music, and it's kind of a specific audience. And I was commissioned by a vocal ensemble, a Quince vocal ensemble, who have gotten some success since then. But I organized a concert for them, as well as another group in New York City. And these 5 women traveled out from Ohio all the way to New York City, stayed at my house. I, cooked them food, and they put on a fantastic concert. They promoted the hell out of this concert. There ended up being about 90 people who paid between $50 to $20 at the door at this concert. And there was another band on the bill, or another group on the bill, ensemble, that also played some of my music. And at the end of the night, I remember walking up there with them, and the guy who's from New York with his ensemble, he very graciously said, well, these ladies came all the way from Ohio. We're not going to take our cut. Just give it to them.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
And those ladies walked out with about $15 each. And that's when I realized, and that's New York City. This guy who had the connection at that, like you said, pay to play, the exposure, all that BS. I was in high school playing in rock bands, and I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is really nowhere. And we would book shows in fire halls, and I'd see Fugazi play in a fire hall, and a group of kids would show up and pay $5, and that was plenty, and they'd be selling their CDs for $8, and that was plenty for them. And they didn't walk out with $15 a piece. They'd walk out with hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which was enough for a night for these guys. These guys were, basically Marxists. And I said, this doesn't make any sense. And so I created this series, Permutations. And initially, this is what it was about. It's still about this to this day. We put on these concerts, and we don't take any money. We book the venue through donations, through our own costs, and every dollar that comes in at the door, or if there are tickets that are sold, goes to the performers directly. So if there's $1,000 of ticket sales, it's $1,000 that go to the performers. On top of that, we try to get wine or beer donated. In New York, we get a lot of help from some breweries in Red Hook that sell us cans of beer for $0.25, craft beer, that we sell for $3 at the shows. And all of that money goes to these performers. And so we've been able to fund recording projects and festivals, international festivals, and all sorts of different things. And yeah, the pay-to-play thing sucks. The exposure thing sucks. There's always people in this line of in the fiduciary line, in the line of the money, that are just trying to reach in and grab it as if there's something that they did.
Yeah, everyone needs their cut.
Their cut, even though this is why the record industry is failing now, and because they don't know what their purpose is.
Right.
It's nice that things are getting closer and closer to the artists, but there's still people out there who feel like they can get ripped off. And unfortunately, there's artists who feel that they don't actually need to get paid for what they do.
Yeah, and I think some of that could be conditioning from this kind of pay-to-play, you're getting exposure kind of thing.
Well, also, yeah, there's that. There's this weird thing of like a lot of these performers that I'm dealing with who are dedicating themselves to some very serious, difficult work, that they're just completely passionate about the work that they're doing, and they go to school for so long to study this.
Right.
And, most of them are paying to go to that school, and they just feel that the audience should come to them. There's a weird sort of entitlement that comes from that. So they don't. So for example, with Permutations, my series, when we're looking for ensembles, it's not only like fantastic musicians and interesting artistry that we're looking for. We're also looking for who's going to actually take this gift that we're giving them and benefit from that in a large way. So I've dealt with performers who are like, oh, well, because I'll be like, oh, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people showing up on the Facebook invite. Have you called everybody you know in New York? Have you called your aunts and uncles? Have you called your cousins?
Right.
Have you told them all to show up? If you get 5 more people at $20 a piece, that's $100 more in your pocket for your thing. Yeah. And it's a weird kind of capitalistic thing at the same time that it's this bootstraps DIY kind of thing too. It's
which to me seems very American. This kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I wanted to ask you, how do you view the music industry? You have a lot of experience internationally and in Europe as well. So how does that play out here in Europe? To me, it seems like there's better funding, but I'm not in the loop like you are.
Absolutely, there's better funding. I mean, it's funny to me, the composers I know here in Prague, how much they talk about, how difficult it is and everything like that. But they also give me these anecdotes about, like, it's a small community in terms of what we do, right? And so they all see each other, they all know each other, but they were all telling me, I've heard this anecdote many times, the time that they see each other every year is at the post office when these grant applications are due. And on that day, the last day to send it out, they're all running into each other at the post office, sending the stuff out, because in the United States, that thing does not exist. We don't have that thing. I mean, in the current era that we're in, I don't know. I've never gotten money from the National Endowment of the Arts. I don't know very many people who have. And there's a lot of money being taken away. In New York, if you live in New York City, there's New York City specific grants. In the Midwest, actually, there's a lot of stuff in Minnesota, for example.
Really? Okay.
You'd be surprised. There's other places that there's very specific things in certain Bay Area of California has some things. NYFA, which is New York State, the New York Foundation for the Arts, is really fantastic. They're giving money, but there are all these private, non-governmental organizations. There's very little funding for that kind of thing through the government, though. I guess we should
flash that right one more time.
I am here as a guest of the Czech and the American government, so I shouldn't complain too much. But that's the
state of affairs right now.
That's the extent of which I've gotten money from government sources. For the most part, all of the musicians and composers that I'm dealing with, artists that I know here in the Czech Republic, 98% of what they're looking for to fund themselves, to make their career continue, to make a project come to fruition, comes from the Czech government or some sort of EU kind of thing. Maybe there's things in Germany, for example, they can apply to,
right.
or things that are like cross-cultural, Slovak and Czech or something like that. I'm not so well versed in that, but I've certainly received funding from European things too. So I'll be in residence in Visby, Sweden, in the beginning of 2021.
Oh wow, that's
cool. I just have to figure out what to do between now and 2020.
There you go. That's a good problem to have. That's for sure. So Ravi, what are some of the places where you've had your music performed? I know there's many, but especially I'd like you to discuss some of the places that absolutely.
Yeah.
This wine's pretty good.
It's not bad. It's nice to try.
So some places where you've also been able some Bulgarian Muscat for you, Jared.
Okay.
Something new for the palate. But anyways, some places where you've also been able to go see your pieces be performed and you've gotten to kind of experience the country and the culture.
Basically, Germany and France. The Czech Republic has been very kind to me since 2009. There's a fantastic, actually, he claims, if you know, anytime you see a biography, it says like parentheses. I don't even know what they write for me. It'll be interesting tomorrow to see if they write California or if they write New York City or what they write. But this guy, Petr Kotik is his name. They write NYC/ either Czech or they write Ostrava.
Okay.
and he runs this festival that I've been a part of 3 times called Ostrava Days. And he's completely an inspiration. This guy, I admire him greatly. And anybody in the Czech new music scene really admires him. He's a composer, he's a flautist, he's a conductor. But he's been putting this festival on since, I believe, 2001. And it's a biennial festival called Ostrava Days. I had a piece performed there in 2009. That was the first time I came to the Czech Republic. And then I had a piece performed and premiered in 2013 that he conducted, that the Janáček Philharmonic performed. And then in 2017... I was writing an orchestra piece for my dissertation at UC Berkeley, and I wanted to have it performed before I defended it. I wanted a recording and I wanted a performance. Very, very strategic move. But I wrote to Peter and I told him, hey, I have this piece and can you do it? And he put it on. It was the second to last piece at the entire festival, Ostrava Days. And I'm so very thankful, and I've learned so much, and some of the preeminent world composers there, there's like 35 or 40 young composers like me, and maybe about 15 or so more prominent, well-known composers like Philip Glass was there.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Probably some other names you wouldn't know, but there are a lot of very, very prominent people. I think Meredith Monk is going to be there in August. Is there a cough button? I don't know.
You're good. Don't worry. You're good.
Anyways, yeah. So, what was the question? I was talking about Peter. Oh, yeah. So that, I think, that's why I'm here now. I went there in 2017 and befriended a couple of younger composers. 2 of my closest friends that I made there are 2 guys who live in Prague. And one of them, they both had studied at HAMU. And they said to me, we need to introduce you to this guy, Michal Rataj, who's a prominent composer here in Prague, who teaches at HAMU and actually was at UC Berkeley on the Fulbright going the other direction. And so he met me and heard my piece and said, we should have you here in HAMU. What are you doing? You're finishing your degree. What's your plan? Come spend some time in Europe. And I sent my Fulbright. I started the Fulbright application about 3 days before it was due. I had to get that.
Bold move.
Because I thought I had missed the deadline. In fact, I said that to Michal. Excuse me.
Cough
so the way exactly. You don't have you got to have a little button you press over there, some distracting noise.
I mean, we have plenty of distracting drops.
Make it sound
Mama hoo-hoo.
Mama hoo. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to make it sound like I farted or something.
He's got tons of drops. A lot of Czech ones.
I could do this all.
Parada. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, yeah, so basically the way the Fulbright works when you're applying as a student, scholar, whatever, you usually apply through an affiliate university where you're at. Mm-hmm. And like UC Berkeley, I think, has a whole office of like 20 people that are there. It's the Fulbright office to help people get their Fulbrights. I missed that deadline. You apply through them, and I missed the entire deadline. And Michal said, well, why don't you just apply at large? You can just apply on your own. Screw them. And honestly, I was like, oh, yeah. I smiled when he said that. And I applied in 3 days, and I got it. So I was happy about that.
Nice. So Chad is an English teacher through Fulbright. I don't really know, like, what is it that is sort of your assignment in the Fulbright as a composer?
That's a great question.
Well, I mean, what is your assignment when you're a composer in general? I mean,
to compose, but for who and how and like, what are they looking for from you as a Fulbright composer?
Okay, well, this is again, I have to ask myself who the audience is here on this podcast, and I have to tread lightly. No, but I am basically, I'm a strange case because I'm not teaching technically. So I've given a few lectures and I have all the facilities at my disposal. There have been musicians who were there. Well, actually, the musicians who were there, they performed my works, but through Hamu, I've had several pieces performed, not by students there. I wish the students had engaged me. But the composition students have engaged me a little bit, and I've given some lessons. I will be sitting on a dissertation committee for one of the graduate students at the end of this term. So I'm sort of quasi-academic, quasi-artist in residence. Yeah, it's not really.
Sounds like a good life.
Yeah, it's not bad. Okay, I'm just gonna say this frankly. I mean, I know the ETAs, like Chad.
Yep.
They have to wake up in the morning and go to a job. Right? They got that. They're getting paid a salary almost, basically. For some of the scholars, they are affiliated with institutions where they're teaching. So then they kind of have a job. But when you're a professor and you're in higher education, I mean, geez, my father's a retired professor. And when he was working a tough schedule, maybe he taught 12 hours a week, right? So that's like nothing.
Yeah, it's not super demanding.
It's never demanding, but then there's the rest of us, and then there are those who are not teaching, and basically you're conducting your own research, which is technically what I'm doing. That's sort of the umbrella I fall under.
Right.
My artistic work is my research, but basically, yeah, I make my own schedule. Especially since I moved to this place in Nusla, I have some more space and I'm doing a lot of work here. If they need me at Hamu, I'll go. But really, there's no real demand for me. But see, this is the thing, the fact that I got here means that I'm trying to get work done.
Right.
That's the selection process, I guess. Yeah, but I'm certainly having my fun too.
But yeah, you've gotten definitely a lot of performances of your pieces. Are you currently working on any new pieces or?
Yeah, I have been, and that's one of the things that sort of, I guess, if there's something I'm not super thrilled about is I kind of came here wanting to work on this big opera project, and that is one of these. It's the largest thing I've ever done, and there's so many steps to it, and I've kind of gotten places and then gone back to the drawing board and rethought things. But I mean, I think the material that I've generated is always something that I can come back to, and that's something that's very, very important to me in the creative process. But since then, as I've connected here, I've been working on sketches for a string quartet process with a fantastic string quartet here called the Fama Quartet, and yeah, I'd like to work with more of the instrumentalists here. And it's funny, sometimes the process just changes. So like, as I was sketching some things for this quartet, I started coming up with some harmonies, and I almost kind of wrote the beginning of a piano piece, right?
Oh, cool.
This thing just kind of came out of it. And I have a dear friend of mine who is the co-curator of Permutations, actually, who's a fantastic pianist who I've written a piece for before. And he'd be thrilled. If I finish this just to surprise him with it. I hope he's not listening.
That would be a nice surprise. Is that Dr. Larson?
Larson, yes,
Yeah.
indeed, a fellow Midwesterner. Oofda.
There you go. I tried to do a little bit of homework before this because I've known Ravi, as a friend, but it's different when you just hang out with someone and you talk versus really knowing someone's accomplishments and their connections and things. But one thing that struck me from the get-go when I met Ravi was just his ability to make friends, meet people, and it seems like everywhere I go with Ravi in Prague, he knows everybody. So how do you actually do that?
No, that's because I take you to the places where I know people.
Well, that's
Trying
true.
to flex on you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, no. Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, man. I mean, look, I don't want to get too dark, no pun intended here, but like there is an aspect of Prague and the Czech Republic is a very homogenous society, and there are certain places where I walk in and it's like, the record scratches, and everybody's taking a look at me. Who's this guy?
Right.
So once I find the places I'm very comfortable in, especially here in Prague, I like to frequent them.
Sure.
And yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So, I mean, it just so happens that those places tend to be places with really good food and drink, and I enjoy those places, and I've developed genuine friendships out of that. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. So, I don't know that you've met too many of my musician friends.
Not yet. Hopefully,
Okay.
hopefully tomorrow
Tomorrow
night.
you will, for sure. And they're great, and it's funny because some of them are Praguers for life, and I'm taking them to new places.
Right. I believe that.
Yeah,
I believe that.
They
Good old Pražáks.
exactly.
But I mean, you clearly, Chad, I think Chad's right in that you clearly do have some sort of skill. I mean, you've started the Permutations where you had to get, connections with these alcohol companies or food companies and book performers. And you also have your connection with your wine people in California. And all of that is sort of the same muscle you're working a little bit. You gotta charm people. You gotta meet a lot of people. That I'm terrible at. And so
Really? That surprises me.
Man.
You should
Yeah,
see.
no.
You should see when we take Jared out to most social events. Jared is a great guy once you get to know him, but you got to break down those walls a little bit. And
I just met him.
I know.
Yeah, but
he's different on the podcast. It's a different environment. That's
you're
for
in
sure.
our territory now. I'm
Right.
I'm comfortable here.
Yeah,
But
you're
yeah.
in Jared's neck of the woods right now. That's for sure.
That's right. I'm in your closet there with the hot water boiler.
That's right. Harry Potter closet. That's right. But see, I do think there is some truth, though, to you being quite the conversationalist. And I think some of that may have to do with you're a very intelligent guy. I think you've seen a lot of really cool movies. You know your music. You know your food and your drink. I mean, I don't mean to fanboy out too hard on you here, Ravi, but I've never really had a boring conversation with you.
Well, let's talk music theory at some point.
Okay, fair enough. But see, I won't find that boring, me as someone who enjoys music. I'm sure Jared will enjoy
I'll find
too.
it immensely boring.
Okay, fair enough. So I have a little music question for you. So Jared and I have started we kind of talked about this before we recorded, but we've kind of started for shits and giggles, for lack of a better term, started kind of what we call just little jam tracks.
We can curse on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
You can say whatever you want.
We have the E parental advisory. So
Okay.
So
good.
yes. But anyway, so we do these jam tracks, right? So usually what I do is we tried to just jam. But because, I'm here in Europe and he's in the States, with the lag and trying to get it so we can hear our instruments through our audio interfaces and everything, we don't have special software. What I did is I recorded the drum track. Well, I put the drum track in GarageBand, recorded a very, very basic chord progression, sent it Jared's way. Jared played piano over top of it, sent it back, and we kind of talked about it. Do you have any tips as a musician and as a composer for Jared and I, what we should be looking for and how we can kind of make these little jam tracks, exciting, good to listen to? I know it's a loaded question, but you're a good guy to ask this.
Well, I mean, embrace the technology that's there. I mean, just like there's so much I mean, we haven't, I don't know if you knew this or we haven't really spoken about this, but I did electronic music for a long time. I was very involved in the rave scene, and I was a DJ in New York for a while. Once you get audio that's yours, it's original, start sampling it. I mean, start messing around with it, start editing it, start looping things, start cutting things up, and don't feel like this isn't the day. I mean, in the old days, and I was one of these guys, and I'm going to show my age, but in the 90s, I had a 4-track recorder, and I would do a lot of 4-tracking stuff. And there were people I know who would do their 4-track recordings and send the tape or pass it off to a friend, overdub something or whatever. In these days, it's so much easier to do something. Don't just overdub. At some point, start thinking about, oh wait, can I cut this into something? This is the thing that the recorded sound medium, just like film. Think about things in terms of film. This is a perspective I've been taking a lot in terms of my composition in the last few years. I'm starting to think about myself more as like a director than a composer.
Interesting.
But the advantage and the amazing thing about the film medium versus a play or drama in general is that you can play with time. You essentially can cut things up, juxtapose them in different ways. Time is what you're essentially your medium. And when you have recorded sound, that's what you're doing as well. So you can take bits that are good and keep dropping them in. You can have bits that you really like and play your little fart noises when you're coughing.
Many fregista.
Exactly. You can do that and do something that maybe is out of the ordinary and is going to surprise you.
That's a great tip and something that I just considered. So we have a sound that we call the untranslatable owl, and it's sort of like our theme almost. And I don't know why we didn't consider...
Play it real quick.
Chad's mom is a big fan of Cuckoo Clocks. And when we first started this podcast, he was at his home in Michigan. And this noise would always, and every time we record, it would always interrupt. And so I got him to stick a microphone up to the clock one time and recorded it. So we use that. And
it sounds like it's underwater. Play it again.
Yeah, it does sound a little. Yeah, he's right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And I use this mic right here to record it. I don't know why it came out that way, but yeah.
I'm sorry. Keep going. Yeah.
No, that's a great recommendation. I'm a novice piano player. I've been playing for about 3 years now, and I'm still in. The jamming part is new to me. I've been playing pieces and reading music and all that stuff. And
I've been trying to get him to jam.
Yeah, my biggest struggle right now is really just getting out of my shell and getting out of my head when it comes to it, because especially with Chad, who's been doing this for forever, and so I'm always a little embarrassed to send him something where it's like, I mean, he's gonna think this is dumb because it's all dumb to me.
But
it's
actually been pretty good. See, Jared's very critical of himself, and the thing with creating music, I mean, yes, you can obviously create very horrible music, but if you're too critical, I think you block yourself a little bit, right? You have to play and experiment and find out what you like, what you don't like. And so I'm trying to get Jared to be just, I send him the chords and say, all right, here's the chords. Just play around with it until you figure out what you like.
Well, I think what you said, Jared, about, this is dumb. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. I meant my part, not the jamming.
Your part. Yeah. Your part is dumb. So I think embrace that. If you're saying it's dumb, my initial reaction is that it's something that's very personally reflective of you, and maybe incisive about something about yourself that you don't like. And maybe, and I'm talking about in terms of your playing, right?
Yeah, I gotta talk to my therapist real quick.
Well, no, it is. It's like that. It's like that.
It's the beauty of music.
I mean, it's but the best part is that the more to really get in there and analyze, well, why is that dumb? Why is it I don't like that? I had a professor at Berkeley who taught a class of undergraduates. One of his assignments was, I want you all to come in and bring in a piece of music that you hate. And they all came in and they would play this music. And every single one of them, he'd ask them, why do you hate this? And there was never anything that was specific about the actual musical quality. A lot of them would say, oh, this is country music. I don't like the stuff they're talking about. It's just a stupid song. It's like because let's remember, music is something that we appreciate because it's something ingrained in us. And there's a societal element to this. It's the society that you're born into, right? That's why you like the things that you like. I'm sure there's stuff beyond that. Right, but look, if you were born, 70 years ago in India, you wouldn't be listening to Jimi Hendrix. I mean, you'd be one of the few rare people if that was the case, right? So these, okay, well that's before Jimi Hendrix, but I'm just saying, I go
what you're saying.
You wouldn't. Your taste is going to be very different if you lived in. It's quite incredible when you think about things like there are. I don't know what the politically correct word is now, but there are Aboriginal people, indigenous peoples in Australia, okay? They're the only people in the world that we know that don't have the fifth in their singing scale. Yes. Oh, wow. So, and in fact, there are people there that don't have octave equivalents. Are you following me with the octave equivalence? Shall I explain?
Explain it to our listeners. I get you.
He understands.
I get you. I'm sure Jared gets you.
Smooth, Chad.
So if I'm singing, if we're at a party and we sing "Happy Birthday to You," I would sing that, and the girls would be "Happy Birthday."
An octave higher.
An octave higher, right? No, in this tribe it would be like "Happy Birthday to," and then someone else would be like "Happy Birthday to you." Like it doesn't, and to them this is like a different. I mean, this is harmony, and it's beautiful. I mean, this stuff I've heard is gorgeous. I mean, there's and maybe there's some. I don't want to get into it, but maybe there's some exoticism as to why I like it or whatever. But there is an aesthetic beauty there that's valued to them. We're conditioned to think these things, but of course, what you're ultimately trying to do is express your own aesthetic viewpoint, what it is that you uniquely can do and no one else can. And there is such a thing, and that's your artistry. And and then what's left is just developing the craft in order to facilitate that.
Yeah. I think that's a big struggle too. Is maybe dumb. I mean, dumb is not that. I did mean that, but I think that might be an oversimplification. I think maybe more of what it is that I feel like a lot of my melodies are simplistic, and I don't know how. And it's just because as someone that enjoys music, it's hard for me to listen to my own stuff and be like, oh, this is good in comparison to like the professionals I listen to.
Well, this is great. I think you've already the fact that you have gone from just basically making a broad, general, and negative comment towards your creative stuff. You've actually come up with a critique now where you're saying, I think these melodies are simplistic. If you want to complexify these melodies, there's all sorts of ways. There's people who, there are techniques for that date back thousands and thousands of years. I mean, if you want to read stuff in the English language, then yes, you can go back a few hundred years. But yes, this is what counterpoint and all these things that the Western systems of composition that came out of Europe 400 or 500 years ago is maybe not that long, but even dating back to a guy like Palestrina, there's all sorts of ways that you can follow up on this and just, do the work.
Yeah, and we're still early into it though. So
we've created one jam track so far.
Practice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a lot of that happening.
The other thing that I wanted to mention too, though, is we are usually, unless you're one of these very cocky, arrogant people, I would say we're usually our harshest critics as well, for the most part.
Good.
Right.
But always step outside of the box. I don't know. Here, one thing I would say also, sometimes I think with a lot of creative people, you're just doing the same thing. You're just banging your head against the wall and doing the exact same thing, trying to, and you get stuck in ruts. And Brian Eno put out this thing, over 20 plus years ago now. It was a deck of cards called the Oblique Strategies. And there was a guy who created a thing on the internet that randomizes it. Basically, it was a deck of cards that you'd pull out, and there would be some sort of aphorism or something that was a suggestion of I don't know, you pull something out and it'll say play all the notes you didn't want to play or something. That's a terrible version of it, but they're much more, some of them are much more inspiring than that. And, stuff like that, just shake it up, shake it up and take risks. There's no reason to fear failure.
You seem to be very good at that too. I've read a lot about you online and stuff, and a lot of it always seems to mention that you're out of the box and trying new things, and you're experimenting a lot. What is how did you get to that? Let me start with this. Chad and I recently we did an episode that was on our how we got into music and what instruments we played and how we chose them and what they sort of mean to us and why we like the instruments we play. Could we get a little background on how you even started how you got into music to begin with? Were you in band in elementary school, middle school, playing a clarinet or something?
This is it's a very long story, but I'll
we have time.
Let me pour some more wine. So I'm the youngest of two children, and my parents. My father was born in Malaysia, and he came to India after World War II. And my mother was born and raised in India, so I'm first generation American. Mm-hmm. And now they have this phrase called Tiger Mom, right? I'm sure you guys have heard this phrase before.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. My mother was definitely a Tiger Mom. On so many levels. So I don't know. My father is a mathematician. He never was trained in music. The first musical lesson, I'm very proud to say this about him, his first music lesson he ever took was at the age of 68.
Oh, that's great.
But he's always been a music guy. An early memory for me is my brother, who's 4 years older than me. They got a piano for him to learn. They wanted him to learn piano. And when the piano got delivered, my father sat down immediately. I'd never seen a piano in my house, never seen my father play piano. He sat down, he started playing some stuff. Never, and he turned to me and he said, "Hey, let's write a song, kids."
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
And my brother was like, "What? Huh?" I'm like, "Okay, let's write a song." And I still remember that. And I'm not saying my father's a great pianist, but he played by ear, and he was very interested in Carnatic music. Again, this is this cultural programming kind of thing. This is what he grew up in. He neither of my parents are literate or skilled in the Western canon of music. So that was just a freeing moment for me right there, and I remember that. This
How old
was
were
before
you?
At that point, I must have been like 3 or 4 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And because my brother, this was when I still lived in Delaware, actually, and my brother was just starting. But I have this vivid memory of that. And I wasn't playing anything, and I don't think I was allowed to touch the piano. And there was this TV show that came on like a year or so later about the Suzuki Method. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Suzuki Method.
Isn't that training by ear?
Yeah. So there was this Japanese guy, Dr. Suzuki, whose basic idea was that children could learn to play an instrument in the same way that they learn a language. And that they're these sponges when they're children, and you should teach them to learn by ear. Before they learn to read, they can start to learn to play an instrument. And my parents saw, there was this show in the 80s, you guys are too young to know it, called Real People, and there was this whole thing about that, and my parents saw that, and they were like, they came to me. And this was also at the early stages of MTV. And my parents came to me, and by the way, the early stages of MTV doesn't mean I had MTV in my house. My parents would never have MTV in my house. But when we would go to other people's houses, like that was the thing. It would be like, oh shit, they got MTV.
Right.
Put it on. This is like,
It's exciting.
We didn't have cable TV and stuff. It would be like there were like 7 channels on. Okay, wait, she's got cable. Oh, she's got MTV. Holy crap, there's Billy Idol. There's Michael Jackson. And so I remember two things I remember from early days of MTV. I remember Michael Jackson Beat It with that Eddie Van Halen guitar solo.
Yep.
And I remember also Owner of a Lonely Heart by Yes and the guitar solo in that. I don't know if you guys remember that song.
I might have to listen to
Owner
it.
of a Lonely Heart, and he uses a crazy harmonizer, Trevor Rabin, the guitarist,
cool. Okay.
on it, and they do this, and it was this image juxtaposed, like it's this weird kind of dystopian society and stuff, and there's like this factory, and there's like a as he goes into the guitar solo, he's got this crazy harmonizer on, and there's like an image of this like glowing buzzsaw cutting through metal. And I was just
weird.
like,
Okay.
And I heard that, and I heard Beat It, and I was like, what? They're plucking strings. I mean, these things sound like laser beams to me.
Right.
These sound like, this is like Star Wars or something. And I was just like, this is crazy. How does that happen? And even at that age. And so my mother, after this TV show, comes to me, and she says, Ravi, would you like to learn to play the violin? And I said, no, I'd like to learn to play the guitar.
Right.
And she says, well, we don't know anybody who can teach you that, but we could start you on the violin, and if you're any good, we'll switch you over to the guitar.
Does it work like that? Is it transferable like that?
No, but I mean, certainly learning any instrument is great.
Right, yeah,
and
for
certainly
sure.
left-hand fingering. There's some things. Okay, maybe.
Some minor transferable skills at most.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. It's a scale length of the thing. This could be a very long discussion. So, anyways, I had this tiger mom who, look, when you're 4 or 5 years old and you're going to a lesson, you can't take your own notes, and you can't. Your mother goes there with you,
right?
And so she would sit there with me, and she would practice with me, and all that stuff. Now, the crazy part, I said how musical my father is, and my mother is probably the least musical person I've ever met in my life, and it's very strange. But she would go with me and take notes, but she was very, call me in. I'd be outside playing with my friend. Ravi, you need to come in. You haven't practiced. You need to practice your violin. Come in. I'd be practicing and doing whatever. And so every year on my birthday, I would ask. I'd say, hey, can I get a guitar for my birthday? You're not practicing your violin enough. You're not doing a good job. You could be doing so much better. And so I would ask every year, And finally, I got to be like 11 or 12, and I was a kid on my soccer team who got an electric guitar, and I had gotten into rock and roll at that point for a couple of years. I was probably in 7th grade or something like that, and I'd been into rock and roll for a couple of years, and I went over, and I remember I was really into The Who. I'm still into my favorite band of all time, and I was really into Quadrophenia, my favorite album of all time. And there was this one part in Quadrophenia, this melody, that I just went and I picked up his guitar and I figured it out. And he was like, shit, man, you're pretty good. Like, you know, and so like I figured out, I can teach myself some of these things. And so I was delivering newspapers. And I realized my parents weren't going to buy me a guitar, so I bought myself one. And I actually started playing in a band before that. I was playing my friend's brother's guitar in a band. And his brother taught me a lot of the initial stuff, and then I taught myself, and then I got really obsessive about it. That was like Shredder era 90s. So I was really, you know, by the time I was 14 or 15, I was really into Stevie Vai and Satriani, Eric Johnson, all the crazy Mike Varney, if you know his label, all those guys. Richie Kotzen was from my town. So like I saw all these crazy shredder, nutty guys that were superhuman, that had much bigger hands than me. And somehow I was teaching myself a lot of that stuff. And
how did your mom feel about you being in a band and playing the guitar in spite of,
they hated it. They hated it. But by the time I was like 11 or 12, they saw that I was rebellious enough that they just they didn't know what to do. They had concern, but they weren't capable of handling me. I mean, I was going. I mean, I saw so many, like, you know. But one of the great things about the crappy place that I grew up in is we had all these. There was a club in town called the Chameleon Club. It still exists, and on Sundays they would do all ages shows. And so I saw so many hardcore bands back in, you know, the early 90s, which turned me on to like Sub Pop records. And, you know, I saw Nirvana several times. I saw so many bands before they became anything. I remember seeing the Jesus Lizard. I saw a lot of the Discord bands, which, you know, as a kid, basically, especially where I grew up, it was classic rock radio. I was into Zeppelin. And, well, actually, very telling thing about me and rock and roll. First two cassettes, rock and roll cassettes I bought were Led Zeppelin 4 and the Dead Kennedys' Frankenchrist. And that probably sums up my taste in rock and roll for, you know, my eternity. It's two disparate things that I kind of connected in a certain way.
So when did you studied music in college?
No, my undergraduate degree is in philosophy, actually. Okay. And but I was heavily involved in the music scene, the electronic music scene in Baltimore. And I was doing a lot of this kind of, before it became really big, this kind of home recording projects and doing a lot of lo-fi stuff. I mean, I guess it was at the same time as like Pavement and Sebadoh and Guided by Voices, who's probably my second favorite band of all time. But yeah, so I was doing a lot of that stuff, but my things were more influenced by electronic music that I was seeing at the time and doing things that were more experimental, looping my guitars. If you know the guitar player Roger Miller, I was really influenced by
I'm
that.
sure Chad does.
Actually, no.
No, okay. So, or like Mission of Burma and stuff like that.
Okay,
like, so I was doing some stuff where I was just rudimentary kind of looping textures and sounds, kind of like Frippertronics, Brian Eno kind of stuff.
At that point, had you already considered or thought or knew that music was going to be your career or part of your career? I'm always confused.
Well, I knew it was my life, but I was brainwashed into thinking that it would never be a thing that I would do. So like
You need to get a good job.
Here's a crazy story.
Right.
Just a month ago, less than a month ago, this month was the anniversary of the Kurt Cobain suicide, and Nirvana was a big thing for me at that time. And Kurt, that happened actually when after I had applied to colleges, and I received I was a Z-Rock scholar. It was something like one of my teachers put my name in the hat for, and I got it, which meant I could apply to the University of Rochester for free. And my teacher, in his smartness, knew that Eastman School of Music was at University of Rochester. One of the best,
a great school.
One of the best music schools in the United States. And so I ended up, they were flying me there and all this stuff. And I applied to school to be an engineer. That's what my parents kind of pushed me towards. And I thought, actually, I was down with it. I thought it was a way to bridge my creativity and my science and mathematical background. I wanted to do things like signal processing and deal with, all that 4-tracking experiments and doing all these crazy electronic sounds and recordings. That was interesting to me. So I was going to be flown up to the University of Rochester to visit. And I was staying with my brother, and my brother was at Princeton at the time. And I was staying with him on the Friday, and I was going to fly out in New York to go to Rochester. And I got a phone call from my friend. This is before social media and all that stuff. And he said, hey, I was like 16 years old at the time. He says, hey, you heard about Kurt? And I was like, what? What happened? He's like, turn on like MTV or whatever. And they did this coverage of it. And I was freaked out. I mean, I saw the guy play like 4 or 5 months before that. And at that night, I had wanted to stay in Princeton because in the Trenton City Gardens, which is a legendary rock club, no longer exists, in Trenton, New Jersey. And I don't know if you guys ever been to Trenton, New Jersey. You're in Philly, yeah.
I've been to Princeton, and I've been...
not Princeton.
Is that around
Trenton.
where Rutgers is?
What?
Isn't that around where I've been? Oh, I've been to the airport. That's why I've been there.
No. Trenton, New Jersey.
Yeah. No, I'm saying
crappy town.
Yeah, I've been to the airport. That's the only thing I know about Trenton.
So Trenton is terrible, and it was worse back then. And so I went that night. The band that I was really into at the time was the Afghan Whigs. I don't know if you guys know that band. They were on Sub Pop Records. They were friendly with all the Seattle scene. They were from Ohio, from Cleveland, Ohio. No, Cincinnati, Ohio, excuse me. And I just was so into that record, and they were on Sub Pop, and I just wanted to go to that show. And I said, fuck it. And I didn't fly up to Rochester. And I went to this freaking show. And I remember walking in, my brother... I had to buy a ticket in the last minute, so I had to walk in. My brother had his ticket at Will Call and his buddy. They were all over 21. I was like 16, but I had a beard, and this was Trenton, and I had dark skin. And so I walk right in. The guy doesn't card me. I sit down at this horseshoe bar. It wasn't a horseshoe bar. It was just rectangular, but it's a big rectangular bar right when you walk into Trenton City Gardens, and the stage is to your right. There's no backstage. All the performers walk from the front. I sit down. Do you guys know the Afghan Whigs, by the way? No? Okay, well,
no.
I'll tell the rest of the story anyways. The lead singer of the Afghan... Well, I sit down at the bar, and I'm kind of thinking about Kurt and all this stuff, and I'm also like, hey, I'm 16 years old, and I'm freaking... I just walked right into this bar in Trenton.
Right.
And I sit down at the bar. The guy's like, what do you want? And I'm like, I'll have a shot of Maker's Mark. Brings me a shot of Maker's Mark. The guy to the right of me, he goes, hey, good choice. He's got the same thing. He cheerses me. And I'm like, oh shit, that's Greg Dooley,
the lead singer. Yeah, okay.
And he cheerses me. I'm like, you're Greg. And he's like, yep. And he's like, I'd love to talk, but I got to go play. So, like I said, there's no backstage.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I'm going to go see the show. And I just walk right behind him all the way up to the front of the stage.
Oh, sweet.
And I saw them and they played like their whole album. They were like, and they knew what had happened. At some point, there was some drunk fuck in the crowd who's just yelling out, play one for Kurt, play one for Kurt. He just kept yelling it out. And Greg and those guys, I mean, shit, you should look them up. And then they were touring on the
sure
General.
Jared is as we're talking.
No, I'm looking at pictures of the Trenton City Gardens. It looks like a real piece of crap.
Yeah, it was a real piece of crap. No longer exists, but a legendary place. There's a great book that was kind of done in the Please Kill Me, if you know that book, style of writing, or Meet Me in the Bathroom, if you know that book. Anyways, just a great book that was done all about all the legendary shows, and they actually talk about that night in that book. And Greg, like, basically, those guys, I mean, they were rough. A major label tried to sign them before they got signed to Sub Pop, and they basically, the guy took them out to dinner, the A&R guy, and he ended up like beat up and bloodied in like an alleyway, like after like those guys. I mean, they weren't that rough, but they were assholes, and they partied hard.
Right.
And so, anyways, they did their album Gentlemen, which, by the way, you guys should listen to like immediately. And Greg responded and was just like, hey, to this guy. He was just like, look, that's a friend of ours. Like, we know the guy. Like, we're really sad, and we're thinking about that little girl that doesn't have a dad anymore. Mm-hmm. And then they went into a song, and anyways, it was an incredible show, and I have no regret of not going to Rochester.
That's great.
It would have been really cold even in April.
Yeah, us being from Michigan, we understand that very much.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Ravi, one thing that we love to do here at the Untranslatable podcast is we have a song of the pod, and we try to feature, have it relevant to the episode. And obviously, having a composer, there were a lot of choices of, really, this episode is more of a piece of the pod, I would say, than a song of the pod. And I didn't want to choose it because we're friends, and I've heard you talk about a lot of your pieces, and I thought I might be a little biased. So I had Jared do the heavy lifting on this one.
Oh, I didn't know. I just recommended a piece. I didn't realize you weren't gonna recommend anything.
Yeah, no, I was waiting for your recommendation. And so
Okay.
so Jared, tell us about your choice, why you chose it, and we would love to hear your own opinion, as the creator of the piece.
Can't we just play an Afghan Wig song from Gentlemen at this point?
Unfortunately,
we could feature that as well.
We can't play, but we can't play other people's music.
Oh, because of
Copyright.
Yeah,
all that fun stuff.
Well, how do you
But
know
I do
mine's
have them
not
up here, and I
copyright?
am going to listen to it.
Well, but see, that's the way the song of the pod works. Is we discuss the song, and then we have a YouTube channel where we post things, and we post it on our Twitter as well.
Yes. Okay. Great.
So we share the media, but we don't do any copyright infringement, so to say, I guess.
Right, right.
So Jared, go ahead and tell us what
Wait.
you're.
So
yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm.
No, you're fine.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So then, what's that little snippet of music at the beginning?
We wrote it. I wrote it.
Yeah, that's Chad. Chad
that's
did that.
Chad.
Fancy, but yeah, I wrote it.
Chad. Okay.
Yeah.
So you should give you.
Just a
You need to
145.
get some royalties from that, buddy. Are you doing that mean little bass lick? That
No, that was a friend of ours.
That's our buddy Chris.
Yeah.
We sent it to him and asked him to put that in underneath.
Yeah, I played with him in a band in college, actually. And
Yeah.
so, because I wrote it at the time, and I was still in the States, and I have a crappy bass guitar, but it always sounded okay. But I basically did the guitar part and the drums, and I was like, well, it's only a little intro. And then Jared was like, no, it's missing bass. So props to you, Jared. And he sent it over to our friend Chris. So shout out to our buddy Chris Blaker for adding that spicy little bass line on top of there. But yeah.
Well, if you guys need some royalty-free music, I'm happy to give you some too, by the way.
Oh, sweet.
I got some electronic stuff you can drop in at any time. But, I mean, I didn't want to step on your toes here,
No, you're
buddy.
good. No, we always try to add music where we can and when we can.
We're actually in the part of this jam session that we've been doing too is so we can. I think we're partially trying to work on a new theme song. We want it to be something that involves both of us and that has a little bit more. No offense to Chad, a little bit more like thought and collaboration behind it, rather than just like let's put something down for the beginning of the. So that's part of this whole jam session thing we're trying to do here as well.
So you weren't thinking at all when you did that.
I basically was like, well, what does intro music sound like? And that was my stab at. Was the first time I had ever written
Like your
intro
version
music.
of the Daily Show intro.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Good comparison.
You know who did the Daily Show intro? Bob Mould.
Really?
Come on, man.
Really? Okay.
Midwesterner should know this. Come on.
Interesting.
I know it's Minnesota, but still. It's not
Minnesota.
far. Minnesota.
Shout out to our
Oofda.
Midwest neighbors.
That's right. Anyways, back to our piece of the pod for this episode.
So
what did
I
you choose, Jared?
I checked out your SoundCloud and I was listening to a lot of the stuff, and the one that really caught my attention was "Shelter" from
Yes.
from 2014. I like it because I always get nervous talking about music especially with the person that made it.
Oh no, please don't.
But
say
but
what you will.
I enjoyed it very much because I enjoyed it had it built in layers. You know, I like that it was the aspect of the slow build to it, and it was almost built. It built tension that it almost felt like the tension was reaching a point of too much, and then another layer would come in and kind of alleviate some of that tension. And what I also liked at the very end is it also kind of left at the end with a little bit of tension too. Like it didn't resolve as much as I was expecting to. But then I at first, not that it even, I would say
it's a tease.
It is kind of a tease. I don't want to say it made me mad, but I'm like, oh man, almost like he got me.
Right. Yeah. Good.
I enjoyed it very much. Where was how did you come up with that? What was the where did that come from?
So you didn't. I'm just curious. You didn't read any of the notes on it or any of that stuff. You just listened to it.
I didn't even notice.
Great.
Where are the notes at? Are they on your website or?
Yeah, and a friend of mine who played on it wrote an article about it. And anyway, okay.
Oh, I think I might have seen that actually. Now that I think about it.
Okay, so the piece was actually written for two trios that do this new music thing that are consummate new musicians. They can read all the. Actually, the funny thing is, the one trio is three Eastman kids. It's a percussion trio called Tigue, Tigue, and I think they just put out a new record, and they are fantastic. Put them on your listening list. Tigue. Tigue. They did a concert a few months ago with Deerhoof, if you know that band. You don't know Deerhoof? Oh, you should.
That's all right.
Anyways, so they're definitely fantastic musicians doing great stuff. Anyways, I saw them play actually, and I'd known them all, but I saw them play as well as this other trio, Concert Black, who were also friends of mine who I'd seen play before. But I saw both trios play separate sets at a festival in Madison, Wisconsin that I'd been going to. And this is this time when I had started this idea of wanting to work with musicians and bringing out their own capabilities and their own voices and playing to them. So the interesting thing about both of these trios, and I didn't say the name of the other one, the other trio is called Concert Black. So the one trio is three percussionists called Tigue. Concert Black is a trio of a flautist, a bassist, and a percussionist. The flautist is now having a lot of success with a group called Underground System Afrobeat, who just recently put out a record. They're touring all over the world. You really should check her out. And they write their own music as well as perform the music of other people. And that was really an interesting idea for me. Both of these trios did that. And so I had been playing in some improvisation ensembles in Berkeley and Oakland with Fred Frith, and one of my professors, Myra Melford, was really, and you should check out Myra's music. She's amazing. And Fred, if you don't know Fred, you're a guitar player. Do you know who Fred Frith is?
Mm-mm.
Oh, geez, you got to know who Fred Frith is.
Okay, I'll check.
We'll talk about this later.
We've got a lot of homework.
We do, but that's great.
Fred, I mean, yeah. So I was working with these improvisation ensembles where I was playing guitar and I'd written pieces for them. And then I saw these guys and I was like, oh my God, they're just so great. And I need to write a piece for them. And it was funny when I was in this improvisation ensemble, like I just kind of had this joke of an idea when we were getting drunk afterwards. And I told my friend, who's a fantastic saxophonist and he's a fantastic ethnomusicologist as well. And I just said, oh, you know what? Because we were working with these kids who maybe couldn't read music and stuff. And I was just kind of like, oh, well, okay, we're not going to notate music. Well, here's how I'm going to communicate with them. I really love the Rolling Stones' Gimme Shelter. Let's just take the first 27 seconds of Gimme Shelter and kind of mix it up and separate it in terms of time, in terms of pieces and instrumentation, and write a piece like that. It was kind of a joke. Mm-hmm. Then I ended up in this seminar with Myra Melford where I had to write these pieces, and I was like, actually, this sounds like something I could do. And so really what Shelter is, and you picked up on it completely, Jared, this building of this
Kudos to you, buddy. Good work.
Parada.
So this first, I guess you can't play Gimme Shelter by the Stones right now.
Nope, unfortunately not. But our listeners out there can definitely give it a listen.
So you listen to the first. So Jared, you remember that end, right? It ends with this snare, right? Mm-hmm. It's like about to start. It's building like it's about. So it's the intro of the song that's like 27 seconds long. And do you remember how long Shelter was, Jared?
13 going on 14 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So basically, that's the idea. So I'm glad you chose that piece. That's one of, I have to say, that is my favorite piece of my own to hear performed.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask you that question, so good work.
That, at least as of right now. But I think part of it has to deal with my connection to those 6 musicians, and actually the recording that you heard is of 7 musicians. Helen Newby, the cellist, also plays on that. And just them and great memories of being around them. And if these guys listen to it, I'd love to get you in the studio to record it properly. Anyways, but that would it's wonderful because I give them enough freedom, and this is something that I like in my pieces. I'm always looking to discover something in every performance. A lot of composers, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but a lot of composers want their pieces to, they have an idealized version in their head, and they communicate it to the performers in that way, in a strictly notated, precise way.
Just play the music kind of situation.
Yes, just play it exactly as this is, and that's it. I am not the same way. There are certain times when I am very precise, and there's certain times when I'm not. I'm very precise in knowing what I want, but I also want to be surprised. I'm precise in the structure and the architecture of it, maybe not in the absolute details as they unfurl in time. Mm-hmm. And so I have recordings of this piece that are longer and shorter and whatever. This also, one of the greatest experiences of having a piece performed and reaction from the audience. When it was premiered, a friend of mine was sitting close to me, and like you were saying, the tension building up. At some point, she started weeping.
Wow.
And if you think about, and I don't know if you guys know the song "Gimme Shelter" by the Stones, and its history, and my friend Owen Weaver, who was a percussionist who played in Concert Black he wrote this kind of short essay write-up about it. I mean, it was the anti-60s hippy-dippy thing. It was Altamont. It was about all the dark stuff that happened. It was the post-apocalyptic 60s kind of thing. Or really pre-apocalyptic 60s kind of thing, and dark, and the chorus, the background singers are singing rape, murder. I mean, that's like what they're singing, and so yeah, that aspect comes out in the mood and the dark. I mean, I think about Gimme Shelter, and I think about all those Martin Scorsese films that have in there where these guys are getting shot. These guys are getting whacked, right? And then, she's crying, and it's affecting people. Like you said, there's this tension, and then at the end, when that drum beat comes in, which is the beginning of the song, right? And then silence. And if you hear the recording of that, the drums come in of that performance. I'd probably edit it out, but it's boom, 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 and you hear somebody go, "Ha!"
Oh jeez!
No! No, I love it. I love it. The piece started, and then in there's somebody crying. I had laughter. And I had tears.
Everything you want.
Exactly. It ran the gamut.
The emotional spectrum had been covered.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes. No, that was huge for me.
Putting that context to it makes a lot more sense to me, because the song constantly is giving me, it gives you that adds that tension, that pressure. And then another part comes into it, so it sort of alleviates that. And it gives you almost a false sense of safety. You feel comfortable hearing that other part come in. And then it keeps building up until eventually you don't have any of it. You think you're going to get it again, and then you don't get any shelter. And so adding that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. It adds a lot more context to
the story of this song, the Maisels brothers had that document. You guys know about Altamont, right?
No, man.
Okay.
No. Once again,
we are not as scholarly
Altamont
as you are.
was so the Stones were really pissed that they didn't play Woodstock, and so they did their own little version of it. They tried to do their own thing. The Altamont Speedway out in California, and they were trying to have this big festival, and this was after Woodstock, and Woodstock was free. Everybody, whatever, all this stuff. Well, how do we afford this? How do we do all this? Well, the brilliant move was to hire the Hells Angels as security. The Maisels brothers, if you know those guys, are documentarians. Albert Maisels, they filmed a documentary about it, just like Woodstock had its documentary. And actually, in the film, you see, and this happens during the song "Gimme Shelter," an African-American man is stabbed by one of the security guys. And the whole concert ends up, it was the disaster. It was the anti-Woodstock.
Didn't a few people die there?
I don't know if other people, but one guy got stabbed by the security, by the Hells Angels, and was caught on camera. So, that was the end of, that was the end of the 60s. That was part of that whole flower power, all that stuff. That was the end, Altamont. So that song is very much about, or that piece sums it up, and that harsh end. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad I chose that one. That was a good choice by me, Jared.
Yeah, good choice. Good choice.
I would give you some serious kudos, Jared. And I'd listened to the piece a few times and got similar feelings from it. And it's weird though. After you listen to it the first time and you go back to it, I guess because you kind of know what's going to happen, I really enjoyed the building of the layers.
Absolutely.
After hearing it because the first time I was kind of like, what's going on
just
here?
Kind of in the murk.
Right. And so it was really enjoyable. And
if you listen to it again, I think one of the more beautiful moments is, like I said, they were all performers, but so in the instructions of the piece, it says play, and it says you can play any instrument. Pitches and stuff are indicated, motifs are indicated, and things like that are indicated. But it says, as far as instrumentation, you can play any piece, any instrument that has ever been used on any Rolling Stones record.
Oh, sweet.
And so, I mean, they could play almost anything. But one of the things that I remember them asking me in early on the rehearsal process was like, can we vocalize? I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the more haunting moments is when a couple of the ladies are vocalizing. Mm-hmm. It's just really...
It's eerie.
Yeah. It's some crazy emotional shit.
Yeah, if you're ready to...
Go ahead.
If you're ready to get the hair, standing up on the back of your neck, that's definitely what will happen at those parts.
Yeah.
Some of your compositions, do they have like electronic components to them, don't they?
Sure, absolutely.
So when you're choosing people to perform your piece, how do you factor in that aspect of it?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question, but the electronics, I guess the way it always works with composers is you have to figure out what people are playing, right? So the electronics for me is always, it's like, oh, that's my job, but I don't want to do a job when it has to be performed, and I might not be there all the time.
Right.
So I always kind of figure out a way, the most simple, easy way, because I've seen, and especially with what I do and the field I'm in, like in the sphere I'm in, there are people who write some incredibly complex electronic patches and programs that do crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And invariably it always fails. So I always write things that I think are no-brainer things to work. Like, for example, tomorrow you'll see it should all go off very easily, and I don't have anything to do with that performance. He should do it completely himself. But I mean, does that answer your question? I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, that was essentially my question. I didn't know if those parts were performed live, or if maybe there was some sort of track in addition to the instrumentation part of it.
In Shelter, to be very clear, there are no electronics.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about that one specifically, but I did listen to some other ones, and I felt like I believe I heard some electronic parts.
Yeah.
And okay. And,
I mean, a couple of them, yeah.
I wasn't sure if those were performed live as well, or if those were tracks that were played in addition to.
Yeah, okay. So, we call this kind of like fixed media. So, like, most of the time what I'm doing, except for, there are a couple of pieces where I don't do this, but most of the time what I'm doing is I'm having one of the performers basically press play on triggering some sort of playback. But I always kind of filter and do something with the playback, so it's always unstable. Like this piece that's being performed tomorrow, the speaker is implanted in the bell of the saxophone. So everything that the saxophonist plays and their body and their instrument and the room that they're in changes the sound of the electronics entirely. So it's not a stable thing. It's always kind of floating about and different.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Right. And that's cool. Really, really fascinating when you think of how a lot of composers approach, their music being performed, right? Especially if you look at the tradition of, you write it at this tempo, here's the notation, play it. Right. And I think it's really beautiful that you are getting, you're allowing the performers to have the freedom to also have their own voice, which I think traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert here, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of composers, they want the composer's voice to be heard, right? This was the thing that they had written. They want...
Well, I do think that the performers who perform my music feel the same way.
Okay.
But I'm trying to... My voice is coming through them, and the idea of my pieces, and specifically the things I've been writing in the last, 4 or 5 years, are these things I call performer specific. So I want to specifically bring out the unique characteristics of that performer that is performing that piece. Mm-hmm. It's not that I write the piece for one specific person. I want whoever it is who plays it to show their capabilities, their specific talents,
their musicality,
even their limitations.
Sure, absolutely.
And that it comes out. I mean that it's interesting for me, and it's I mean, like you'll see in Cuba tomorrow, there are moments like I was rehearsing with Mikhail, and I was like, we were talking about this one part, and I'm like, basically the idea is that I don't want you to do that, but the idea is that you basically run out of breath here. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm running out of breath here.
Right.
I like that. That's an interesting way to approach it. I like that a lot.
Exactly. Absolutely. So for all of our listeners out there, check out on our Twitter, Untranslatable1, we will have the link to Shelter, thank you, sir, by Ravi Kittappa. It is a fantastic piece. We hope we didn't spoil too much of it, but it'll definitely give you a different insight while you give it a listen. And it's absolutely fantastic. And do you have any other questions for Ravi, Jared?
I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but
Really, I feel like I just rambled. I took over the whole thing. I don't know.
That's why we wanted you as a guest.
Well, I wanted to crack more jokes. I don't know.
We can always have you on as a guest again. We've definitely enjoyed ourselves.
And also, we should definitely have you back sometime, because I do want to get more into your travels at some point too.
Okay, sure.
Absolutely.
Food and drink and all that stuff. I love to talk about that. Wine.
I'm an amateur chef myself, so I would love to pick your brain about food.
At some point, and you should have me Skype in when I'm in Paso and back in wine country. And
that's a good idea.
That's a great idea. Absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll make that happen.
So to all of our listeners out there, I think that's hopefully a fair, fairly obvious telltale sign. Hopefully we'll have Ravi back again sometime soon. We can talk about travels, food, all sorts of things. And we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, enlighten us and our listeners as well on your compositions and
you betcha
all sorts of things, music as well. And we really appreciate it here at the Untranslatable Podcast. And for all of our listeners out there who are curious, well, we've heard so much from Ravi. Where can we find his stuff? Check out ravikittappa.org for information on his performances. Also, just some basic information about you as a person and as a composer.
Yeah, the performances might not be so updated, but you can check there, send me an email, whatever. Go to my SoundCloud page. If you just Google my name, my last name is Kittappa, Ki 2 T's A 2 P's A.
Yeah, and I'll also tweet out the SoundCloud link as well when the episode drops.
And definitely put that Afghan Wigs thing in there.
We'll do that just for you as a tribute to you as our guest. Absolutely.
Yes, I will.
So to all of our listeners out there, we really appreciate your support. And let us know if you have any questions for us or for Ravi, and we can definitely relay them his way. You can contact us. Sorry, I can't talk tonight. You can contact us at, I know, right? You can contact us at untranslatablepodcast@gmail.com. Check out our website for untranslatables, links to our episodes, and all sorts of other fun things at untranslatablepodcast.com. Check out the Twitter, as we mentioned, for the Song of the Pod, Untranslatable1. And of course, as always, check out that Poppin' Instagram page, Untranslatable Podcast. And lastly,
spread a little love.
As Jared always says, make sure 5-star reviews, iTunes and Stitcher, and give us some feedback. If you have any guests you'd like us to have on, if you have any untranslatables you would like us to share, or any questions you would like us to discuss or answer, let us know. So we appreciate it. Thanks again for the enlightening conversation.
Thank you, guys.
And the fun. We really appreciate it, Ravi. Yeah. And to all of you, as we say here,
thanks, Jared.
Oh, thank you. It's great to meet you.
And muchas gracias.